You're listening to Retro Reels, a show that looks back on films from time gone by and recalls the various events, trends, and perspectives that inform their creation. I'm your host, Hannah Walensky, here to guide you through a trip to the past via the silver screen. The Mother's Day festivities continue through the month of May as this week I watch a movie recommended by my mother, the 1996 film by Mike Leigh, Secrets and Lies. So far, if you've been following along, I opened May with a double feature about motherhood, centered on Joan Crawford, then followed with a movie that reminds me of my mother, and this week comes the direct recommendation by her. Something about my mom, she loves British television. And there really is something about it. Part of it is just personal preference, of course. She loves to read mysteries and detective stories, and the Brits more readily adapt that material to the screen because, well, they were the ones to come up with Sherlock Holmes in the first place. But it's also something else. At first I guessed it must be that long tradition of theater, that they tend to take acting as a craft a lot more seriously, and they're a lot more engaging to watch as a result. Well, that's almost the right answer. After doing a bit of research, I found that's not the main factor. It's shaped much more by Britain's public broadcasting infrastructure, which rewards, above all, excellence in writing. Duh, right? How could anyone act well if there's not good writing to act from? I don't know how it didn't occur to me. But I guess it didn't because I'm so used to the writing being good for a British production that it's something I took for granted. The thing is, your ideas won't really make it onto the screen in the UK if you can't write your way out of a brown paper bag. Their literary and theatrical culture values the writer. This feeds into a screen culture where writers are auteurs, where language matters, and where ideas drive the narrative rather than the other way around. This works together with the conditions created by their public broadcasting system, particularly the BBC, which is unique for being funded by a flat license fee rather than being beholden to advertising or subscriptions, so it answers to what the public wants over what corporations or shareholders want. That environment rewards risk and creativity. Plus, they've got a whole writer development pipeline in place to help develop voices before they hit television. Mike Leigh is one such writer. Leigh first cut his teeth as an assistant director of plays with the Royal Shakespeare Company before transitioning to making televised plays and films for BBC television, where he stayed through the 70s and 80s. He gradually moved toward independent cinema in the mid to late 80s, and by the time he made Secrets and Lies, he had established himself as a first-class independent feature film director. Many of his working methods, which are based strongly in improvisation and rehearsal-based scripts, were shaped by his experience working for the BBC. Now, the thing about the BBC is it being as big, nationally important, and politically exposed as it is naturally bakes in a certain degree of institutional conservatism. They have to play it on the safe side. A BBC product can be, and often is, excellent. It just tends not to be radical. That's where Channel 4, Film 4, and the British Film Institute come in. The UK's robust independent film scene exists largely because of them, and all three played important roles in Leigh's later career. Ultimately, the funding ecosystem created by these four entities, the BBC, Channel 4, Film 4, and the BFI, enables serious work to be made cheaply, without needing to perform commercially. The infrastructure doesn't always finance the specific film, but it can help create the conditions for the person who makes it. The reputation Leigh built and the support of Channel 4 Films made it possible for Leigh to obtain financial support from French production company Sibi 2000 to make what I consider a really unforgettable film.
Sitting with a slapper, then I see it's a pimp and it's crack core. You
Secrets and Lies is not a short movie. It's basically a series of humanistic skits between all the characters and one another, or their friends, coworkers, former friends, or strangers that work together to create portraits of these characters, what kind of people they are, and their relationships with one another, that all come together to make them feel really complete. So even though the runtime is almost 2.5 hours, you become so absorbed in it that it chugs right along, all the way up until the final confrontation, which by that point feels just as uncomfortable to you as it's meant to, familiar as you are with everyone attending and how they all feel about one another, what they know and what they don't know about each other. The barbecue at Maurice and Monica's is the big emotional moment the film has been barreling toward the entire time. It feels like you almost know how it's going to go, based on all the data you've collected about everyone so far, and yet it manages to surprise you anyway. The first person you meet is Hortense, a black optometrist who, after burying her adoptive mother, decides to trace her birth mother. This search leads her to Cynthia, a white working-class woman who gave her up for adoption when she was just 16 years old. A few years later, Cynthia had another child out of wedlock, Roxanne, who lives with her mother in the old family flat that Cynthia grew up in and works as a street sweeper. Roxanne is about to turn 21, so her uncle, Cynthia's brother Maurice, proposes the idea of hosting a barbecue/birthday party at his home. Maurice has built a pretty successful career as a portrait photographer, and he lives comfortably in a large house with his wife, Monica, a very tightly wound and unhappy woman whose personality clashes with Cynthia's. This has driven a bit of a wedge between Maurice and his sister, although he obviously cares deeply about both women. Hortense and Cynthia quietly connect and build a relationship, culminating in Cynthia inviting her to Roxanne's birthday party, then letting the cat out of the bag, which you knew she was going to do. It sounds deceptively simple, laid out like that, but all the beauty is in the details, the little bits of dialogue and behaviors and outbursts of emotion that gradually expose the kind of person each character is. And then there's that underlying narrative about class divisions in British society always simmering just under the surface. Now, a lot of countries and cultures have some form of class stratification, some more rigid than others, but Britain's is by several degrees more intense than American class anxiety, for example, which is typically expressed through conspicuous consumption, what you wear, what you drive, what your house looks like, and what neighborhood it's in. Actually, in America, we generally don't say class, we say tax bracket. And you can, by running up a serious credit card debt, successfully appear richer than you actually are. But this is not so in jolly old England. As soon as you open your mouth, people know where you grew up, what school you went to, and what that means about your socioeconomic status. In Secrets and Lies, the class system's sorting mechanisms produced a black, professional woman who is more socially stable than her white, working-class birth mother. And the sneaky thing is, this sets you up to think the movie is mainly going to be about race, but it's not. Hortense has it more together than anyone else in the movie. It's not that it ignores race either, it's just not the organizing subject. And what Lee showed in the end was that the economic and educational circumstances a person is raised in are more determinative than racial ones. And, rather incidentally, the film arrived at a pretty significant moment for adoptees, because before the mid-90s, closed adoption was the standard model for most of the post-war period, meaning birth records were sealed, identities hidden, and the kind of search Hortense undertakes was legally difficult or even impossible for most people. But by the time Secrets and Lies released, there was a growing movement of people pushing for adoptee rights to access birth records. In fact, the movie ended up being the subject of positive pickets by North American adult adoptee political advocacy and support organization Bastard Nation, which used it to raise awareness of sealed birth records throughout the US and Canada. Lee didn't actually have any particular motivations in this regard, but you can see how his sensitive treatment of the subject matter makes it great cultural material for adoption advocates. Secrets and Lies is a long, slow burn that very much hinges on the acting ability of every person involved. And I do mean every person. They all bring something to the cast. Every character feels very real, very lived in large part because of Lee's lengthy rehearsal and improvisation techniques. While Lee picked up a few tricks during his time with the BBC, his approach is also quite a bit different from the typical directors. He starts with the actors, casting people he wants to work with. Then he asks them to think of real people from their lives, and over the course of weeks or months, he builds a character with them. Only when these characters are fully established does he introduce them to one another, and not as themselves, but as the characters they have created. He sets up scenes for them to improvise through, and everything kind of just flows out from that organically. So that 7-minute take in the cafe, when Hortense and Cynthia meet for the first time, they really are meeting as Hortense and Cynthia for the first time. That's why, watching this movie, you feel like each person is real, and their relationships with one another, their reactions to one another, are real. It's a very radical way to approach filmmaking, and the effect is unlike anything else I've ever seen. And it's no surprise that it received the recognition it did. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and netted Brenda Blethyn, the actress who plays Cynthia, the Best Actress award. It then released to universal critical acclaim. Between the Academy Awards and Golden Globes, it was nominated 8 times, and at the 50th British Academy Film Awards, it was nominated 7 times, winning Outstanding British Film, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Actress in a Leading Role for Blethyn. The story of how I came to be recommended this film by my mother is because one year when I made a trip back to the United States to visit my parents, the last year, in fact, that I went back before a certain little baby was to exist, my mom was watching a show called Vera, starring Brenda Blethyn as a detective, and I became really enthralled with it. And so we binge-watched several episodes, and I grew to like Blethyn more and more. And so she said, oh, if you like her, then let's watch this movie, Secrets and Lies. So we did, and it was amazing to see Blethyn, who plays this very clever, very quick-witted and irascible, but at the same time occasionally motherly and warm role as Vera, be something entirely different in this film. This ridiculous, over-emotional woman who is prone to being self-pitying and hysterical. It's amazing because it's pitch perfect. You do really feel sorry for her. You know based on the story that she's been through a lot and that her pain is legitimate, but at the same time, she is so annoying and so silly that you have to laugh when she collapses into tears. She was rightfully lauded for her performance as Cynthia, and in fact, it was her film breakthrough. She enjoyed a pretty robust film career for the remainder of the 90s through the aughts, before then finding renewed success on television in Vera, which became one of the most watched British dramas of the 2010s. I also want to highlight Timothy Spall, whom I'd wager a lot of Americans only know as Peter Pettigrew through the first Harry Potter films. Which is a shame, because what an excellent actor he can be beyond just playing the human personification of a rat for a children's story. As Maurice, Spall is a very recognizable element of the dysfunctional family, the most emotionally mature one, who takes it upon himself to try and keep everybody together. That's the thing about British actors. They commit, and they convince. They're also not so inhumanly attractive that it's distracting. They look like normal people you could know in real life. And they don't nip and tuck them until they're uncanny like they do in Hollywood either. They just let them age normally. Looks aren't the barrier to acting in the UK. It's talent. Not that they're ugly, but they look normal, you know? Okay, some of them are kind of ugly, but they have so much charisma that it just becomes part of their charm. I like it. Okay? I like how they're kind of ugly, and I think you should too. That's all I have for you guys today. I'm Hannah Belinsky. Thank you for tuning in to Retro Reels, and I hope you'll join me again next time on another look back on the way things were.
Catch the latest RTI news, programs, previews and more on our website rti.org.tw/en.